So it's a success story because there are plenty of CEOs or plenty of people who are in prominent leadership positions or positions of responsibility who have had mental health issues but just don't talk about it.
The moment the news broke, it spread across the world like a sudden storm that nobody saw coming. Headlines flashed within minutes. Social media exploded with theories, and royal watchers everywhere rushed to understand what had actually happened. The claim that Prince William had taken control of what was being described as the Queen's secret estates instantly turned into one of the most talked-about royal stories in years. For many people, it sounded too dramatic to be real, almost like something from a political thriller rather than a modern monarchy. Yet the intensity of the reaction showed just how deeply people are still fascinated by the inner workings of the royal family. At the center of the storm was confusion. Some reports suggested it was a routine legal transfer of property management, while others described it as a silent power shift inside the royal household. This mix of facts, speculation, and emotion created the perfect environment for rumors to grow. Within hours, online discussions were filled with questions. Was this planned long in advance? Was Queen Camilla aware of it? And why were certain parts of the royal estates being described as secret in the first place? The lack of clear answers only made the situation more explosive. Public reaction quickly split into different camps. One group supported Prince William, seeing him as a modernizing figure trying to secure the future of the monarchy. They believed that if such a move had taken place, it was likely part of a long-term strategy to protect royal assets and simplify control of estate management. To them, William represented stability, discipline, and the next logical step in royal leadership. His image as a calm, responsible heir made the idea of him taking control seem almost natural, even necessary. But another group saw the situation very differently. For them, the story sounded like a hidden internal struggle inside the royal family. They questioned why such important estates would suddenly become the subject of controversy. Some even suggested that this was not just about property, but about influence, authority, and the balance of power behind palace doors. This perspective turned the story from a simple administrative change into something far more dramatic, a silent conflict between different branches of the royal household. As speculation grew, Queen Camilla's family also became part of the public conversation. Reports and online commentary began to suggest that they were shocked or unhappy about the decision, even though no official statement confirmed this. Still, in the world of viral news, perception often moves faster than truth. The idea that one branch of the royal family might feel sidelined added emotional fuel to the fire. It turned the story from a legal matter into a personal drama, which is exactly the kind of narrative that captures global attention. Television commentators, royal analysts, and social media influencers all joined the discussion. Some tried to calm the situation by explaining how royal property structures usually work, pointing out that many estates are managed through complex legal frameworks that change over time. Others, however, leaned into the mystery, highlighting the word secret, as if it hinted at something hidden or previously unknown to the public. This contrast between explanation and speculation kept the story alive and constantly evolving. What made the reaction even stronger was the timing. In a world already full of political uncertainty and global tension, any suggestion of internal conflict within one of the world's most famous monarchies immediately attracted attention. People were not just reacting to the news itself. They were reacting to what it symbolized. Power, legacy, tradition, and change all collided in a single narrative that felt larger than life. By the end of the first wave of reactions, one thing was clear. Whether the story was fully accurate, partially true, or heavily exaggerated, it had already succeeded in capturing global attention. The idea of Prince William seizing control of royal estates had become more than just a headline. It had become a talking point, a debate, and a mystery that people wanted to see unfold. And as the public tried to piece together what was real and what was rumor, one question remained at the center of it all. If this really was a shift in power, what would it mean for the future of the royal family? As the first wave of shock began to settle, attention quickly shifted from the headlines to the details. People wanted to know what was actually meant by the idea that Prince William had seized control of the Queen's secret estates. The phrase itself sounded dramatic, almost aggressive, but the reality behind it, if there was a clear reality at all, was far more complex and less clear than the language being used online suggested. Still, In the world of viral stories, once a powerful phrase takes hold, it often becomes stronger than the facts themselves. According to the narrative circulating across media discussions and online platforms, the estates in question were not ordinary royal properties. They were described as private, lesser-known holdings connected to the late Queen's long-term planning and financial structure. Some commentators suggested these estates were part of a carefully managed trust system designed to preserve royal assets across generations. Others claimed they were simply misunderstood administrative properties that had now been reorganized under the next generation of leadership. The truth, however, remained buried under layers of speculation. What made the story especially powerful was the way it framed Prince William's role. Rather than being presented as a gradual transition of responsibility, the situation was described in sharp, almost confrontational terms. Words like seized, taken control, and locked in authority created a sense of urgency and tension. This kind of language immediately changes how people interpret events, even when the actual process may be routine or legal in nature. It transforms administration into drama and procedure into conflict. Within this narrative, the estates became more than just property. They became symbols of influence. For many observers, ownership or control of royal land is not just about land itself, but about who holds decision-making power within the monarchy. That is why the story quickly evolved beyond financial or legal discussion and entered the realm of internal royal dynamics. People began to imagine conversations behind closed doors, disagreements over authority, and quiet negotiations that the public would never fully see. At the same time, Queen Camilla's position was pulled into the center of speculation. Even without confirmed details, online discussions began suggesting that her side of the family felt excluded or blindsided by the changes. This added a personal dimension to the story, turning what could have been a bureaucratic adjustment into a narrative of emotional tension and division. In reality, royal estate management is usually handled through formal structures and legal advisors, but the public imagination rarely stays within those boundaries once a dramatic story takes hold. Royal commentators tried to break down the situation in more measured terms. Some explained that transitions of control within royal estates often happen gradually over time, especially as responsibilities shift from one senior figure to the next. Others pointed out that the monarchy operates through layers of legal frameworks that separate personal ownership from institutional control. However, these explanations struggled to compete with the emotional weight of the viral version of the story, which was far more gripping and easier to share. As discussions continued, another theme began to emerge: timing. Many people questioned why such a transition would become public or widely discussed at this particular moment. Was it connected to broader changes within the royal family? Was it part of a long-term modernization plan? Or was it simply a misunderstanding amplified by social media? The lack of official clarity allowed all these theories to exist at the same time, each one gaining attention in different corners of the internet. What stood out most during this phase of the story was how quickly interpretation replaced information. Few people were discussing verified facts. Instead, they were analyzing tone, symbolism, and possible hidden meaning. This is what often happens in high-profile royal stories. The narrative becomes less about what is confirmed and more about what feels possible. And in this case, the idea of a takeover felt powerful enough to dominate the conversation, regardless of its accuracy. By the end of this stage, the story had fully transformed. It was no longer just about estates or administrative changes. It had become a narrative about authority, transition, and control within one of the world's most closely watched families. And as speculation deepened, one question began to rise above all others. If this was not simply a legal shift, then what kind of internal tension might still be unfolding behind palace doors? As the story continued to spread, attention naturally shifted toward the people who were believed to be most affected by the decision: Queen Camilla's family. Even though there were no official confirmations of anger or conflict, the narrative that had formed online quickly filled in the gaps with strong assumptions. In viral storytelling, silence is often interpreted as secrecy, and secrecy is often interpreted as tension. That is exactly what began to happen here. According to the circulating discussion, Camilla's family was reportedly caught off guard by the scale and timing of the estate changes. Some versions of the story suggested they had expected to have a more active role in the future management or use of certain royal-linked properties. Others claimed there had been ongoing conversations behind the scenes that were suddenly interrupted by a final decision favoring Prince William's authority. Whether these claims were accurate or not, they created a powerful sense of conflict that kept viewers engaged. What made this angle especially compelling was the emotional framing. Instead of focusing only on legal structures or administrative control, the narrative introduced ideas of trust, expectation, and disappointment. It suggested that this was not just a matter of paperwork, but a shift that affected relationships within the royal household. Once a story moves into the territory of family dynamics, it becomes much more relatable and therefore much more widely shared. Online reactions amplified this perception even further. Social media users began debating whether Camilla's family had been gradually losing influence over time, or whether this was an unexpected turning point. Some argue that royal transitions are always carefully managed and that no major decision of this scale would happen without internal agreement. Others believe that even within highly structured systems, disagreements and power struggles are inevitable. These opposing views kept the conversation alive and constantly evolving. At the same time, the idea of backlash began to take shape. In many retellings, this backlash was not described as public confrontation, but rather as private frustration, legal questioning, or quiet dissatisfaction. The absence of visible conflict made the story even more mysterious. People tend to fill silence with imagination, and in this case, that imagination leaned heavily toward tension and disagreement within palace circles. Royal analysts and commentators attempted to step in with more grounded explanations. They pointed out that the management of royal estates typically involves layers of trustees, legal advisors, and institutional frameworks that are designed to prevent sudden personal disputes from directly affecting decision-making. In other words, even if emotions exist behind the scenes, the system itself is structured to operate independently of personal reactions. However, these explanations often struggle to compete with the dramatic version of events that had already taken hold in public discussion. Another layer of interest came from the broader perception of power within the royal family. Any suggestion that one branch of the family might be gaining more control naturally leads to questions about balance and influence. People began to wonder whether the situation reflected a larger shift in how authority is distributed within the monarchy. Was this a simple estate management update, or was it part of a deeper restructuring of roles and responsibilities? The uncertainty made the story feel even more significant. As the narrative developed, Camilla's family was increasingly portrayed as being on the defensive side of a larger institutional change. Whether this framing was accurate or not, it contributed to the emotional weight of the story. It created a sense of side being formed, even if in reality the situation may have been far more procedural and less personal than suggested. In the end, what stood out most in this phase of the story was not confirmed conflict, but perceived conflict. The difference between the two is important, but in viral media, perception often drives engagement more than verified detail. And here, the perception of tension was strong enough to sustain global attention, keeping audiences invested in what might happen next within the royal narrative. As speculation continued, one final question began to dominate discussions. If there was this much alleged frustration and disagreement surrounding the estates, what role did legal structures and royal authority actually play in shaping the outcome? As the discussion intensified, the focus gradually moved away from emotions and family reactions and shifted towards something more structured and complex, the legal and strategic framework behind the entire situation. This was the part of the story where speculation turned into analysis, and where viewers tried to understand how something described as a seizure of royal estates could actually take place within the rules of a monarchy that is built on tradition, law, and carefully balanced authority. In the narrative being circulated, Prince William was not portrayed as acting alone or impulsively. Instead, he was described as operating within a pre-existing system of legal arrangements, trusts, and constitutional structures that govern royal property. These systems are often designed to ensure continuity, protect assets, and prevent disputes from destabilizing long-standing institutions. In this version of events, what looked like a sudden move was actually the result of long-term planning and legal preparation. According to the storyline, a series of legal mechanisms were allegedly activated to formalize control over certain estates. These mechanisms were described in dramatic terms online, but at their core, they represent the kind of administrative tools typically used in managing large institutional holdings. Trust structures, inheritance frameworks, and royal oversight systems are all part of how assets connected to monarchy are traditionally handled. The key difference in this narrative was the suggestion that these tools have been used decisively and at a critical moment. What made this phase of the story especially powerful was the idea of strategy. Rather than a simple transfer of responsibility, it was framed as a carefully planned sequence of decisions. Supporters of this interpretation believe that Prince William was acting to secure long-term stability, ensuring that estate management remained clear, centralized, and aligned with future leadership. In this view, the actions were not disruptive but protective, designed to prevent confusion or competing claims over valuable properties. However, critics of the narrative saw it differently. They questioned whether such a move could really happen without broader consultation or agreement within the royal framework. Some suggested that the language of seizure and control exaggerated what might have been a standard administrative transition. Others pointed out that royal estates are typically governed by strict legal guidelines, making sudden unilateral action unlikely without multiple layers of approval. Despite these competing interpretations, one thing became clear. The idea of legal strategy made the story feel more real and more serious. Instead of just being a family dispute, it now resembled a structured power shift supported by legal documentation and institutional authority. This transformation in tone significantly increased public interest because it gave the story a sense of legitimacy, even in the absence of verified details. Another important element in this phase was a perception of timing. Many discussions focus on why such a legal move will be highlighted or interpreted as happening at this specific moment. Was it part of a planned transition of responsibilities? Was it connected to broader changes in royal governance? Or was it simply the result of internal processes being misunderstood when viewed from the outside? The lack of clear answers allowed multiple theories to exist simultaneously. Royal commentators attempted to bring clarity by explaining that large estates associated with a monarchy often operate under long-term legal frameworks that change gradually over time. They emphasize that transitions of oversight are usually designed to ensure continuity, rather than disruption. However, these explanations often struggle to match the dramatic framing of the viral narrative, which presented the situation as a sudden and decisive turning point. What made the legal aspect of the story particularly engaging was the contrast between complexity and simplicity. On one hand, the real structures involved are likely highly technical, involving legal experts and institutional procedures. On the other hand, the viral version reduced everything into a clear and dramatic storyline of control shifting from one figure to another. This simplification made the story easy to follow, even if it sacrificed nuance. As the discussion evolved,